CCAA 69. What is happiness and how can it be achieved? One of the most important aspects during the development of philosophy in ancient Greece was ethics, where Aristotle stated that every human being is constantly searching for happiness. However, with the passing of the years and the formation of more complex societies, the emotional and intellectual differences between people have become more evident, making it difficult to define this emotion in a general way. People who suffer from psychological disorders such as depression or anxiety seek that these problems disappear at all costs, and when they do, all they want is to be happy. However, the clinical psychology that is dedicated to treating them only deals with suffering, whose absence does not translate into happiness, nor guarantees any kind of positive emotion. This makes it necessary for each individual to consider what their meaning is on a personal level, as it is no use overcoming obstacles and impediments unless one knows what to do next. According to Martin Seligman, a renowned psychologist and writer of American origin, happiness can be analyzed in different ways. From the temporal point of view, sensations such as satisfaction and serenity are born in the past, while in the present are all those momentary pleasures, which are achieved through learning and education. Emotions such as optimism and hope are in the future. On the other hand, it is suggested that there are three types of happiness, which obey different forms of personal transcendence. Hedonistic happiness, as its name suggests, is based on pleasure. It is not exclusively about the sexual aspect and the carnal desires, but in the positive emotions that are generated in the search to enjoy life. In this way, you can feel joy, fun, love, gratitude, inspiration, and much more. There is also the happiness that comes from being committed to a task that motivates us. Here is the feeling of serenity, which usually translates into a state of fluidity and fullness. Once the goal has been achieved, pride invades the person, because their abilities have been put to the test successfully. The third type of happiness is that which is born when an activity is carried out that gives meaning to our existence. It basically consists in acting according to a cause or another person, like children, a political party, an ideal, or humanity itself, giving a value superior to oneself. Regardless of the suffering that may be experienced during this process, positive emotions arise from the assessment of the sacrifice made. Taking into account all these approaches, it is clear that the only way to achieve happiness is by following certain behaviors, which will increase the perception of positive emotions. You should enjoy the present and value the past, see the future with hope, and always dedicate time for pleasurable, interesting, and altruistic activities. CCA 70. How to overcome the problems of self-esteem. The problems of self-esteem can be caused by a series of psychological and social factors. This is understandable when we consider the different types of obstacles that arise during the life of any person, which, not being overcome successfully, cause the appearance of negative thoughts. Therefore, it is very important to learn to accept yourself, including all the virtues and defects. During adolescence, the most critical phase of personal assessment is presented, influencing its development based on experiences and relationships. Young people are in need of forging a firm identity, knowing their capabilities thoroughly. It is convenient to resort to the support of the family in the emotional plane, but without creating a dependence that harms their future as independent citizens. Each individual has a level of security and confidence that affects the perception he has about himself, manifesting himself when resolving all kinds of conflicts. When you have a low self-esteem, fear of failure motivates indecision, allowing opportunities to pass that may not be repeated. People who go through these situations must understand that there are always implicit risks, and regardless of whether the result is not as expected, tomorrow represents the possibility of doing things better. However, although positive thinking can be a great help in dealing with self-esteem issues, it is important to be clear that suffering and sadness are also part of personal growth. Seek the approval of third parties is an attitude that should be avoided, given that it is impossible to please everyone. Instead, it is advisable to express your own opinions without fear of rejection. Likewise, the comparison with others has to be replaced by constructive admiration, something that favors the imitation of healthy values and behaviors. On the other hand, we now have a broader view of mood disorders, such as depression. This has allowed many people to resort to specialists in the subject to receive the most appropriate treatment. Thanks to certain medications and behavioral therapies, they successfully integrate into society, solving self-esteem problems that they would otherwise be unable to overcome. Self-evaluation is an essential tool for anyone to work on their self-esteem. It is only necessary to reflect on oneself and accept oneself as such, leaving aside irrational guilt and comparisons. This increase in trust will also have a positive effect on social relationships, which are essential to find happiness. 71 Educational psychology and its role in learning. Educational psychology is a term that is used to define all those disciplines that are involved in teaching and learning processes. Although it uses several methods and theories typical of conventional psychology, it also includes new approaches that allow a better approach to the student stage of any person. Innumerable investigations have revealed its importance for an adequate social, cultural and family development, so that, in the present essay, I will seek to analyze the problems it faces and how they are addressed. On the educational level, the work of psychologists increases in complexity according to the socio-economic status of a given community. This is because each context brings with it a series of problems in learning, as well as significant variations in the psycho-evolutionary processes of man. It is also worth mentioning the theories applied in classrooms, the curriculum, and the limitations that some school institutions have. All this implies the need to create plans and study programs according to each country, constantly improving and updating their education system. To address the aforementioned problems, educational psychology focuses on certain factors that are part of every society. Here are personal development, motivation, and metacognition. By carefully analyzing each one of them, you can have a more accurate approach to understand and solve the present obstacles. However, it is essential to work with the state to carry out the changes that are necessary, since education is the basis of the progress of any nation. On the other hand, educational psychology aims at self-regulation in the learning process. Each person must have the ability to activate and maintain their thoughts, behaviors, and emotions, according to a particular goal. The objective of this is for teachers to become support elements in schools, instead of creating a dependency based on the validation they provide. Students who manage to develop academic learning skills, which they then complement with self-control, feel motivated by their own will and will always seek to learn more. Although hundreds of scientific discoveries have been made in recent years to understand how the human brain works, there is no doubt that educational psychology continues to face problems to be properly implemented in different countries of Latin America. The model of conventional education must be discarded and renewed, giving priority to reflection and introspection. Students have to be placed in situations that motivate them to understand their context, being guided at first through explanations, demonstrations, and group work. CCA 72 The beginnings of philosophy in the West and the works of Plato. The history of philosophy in the West covers more than 2,500 years, taking as a starting point the thinkers who appeared in ancient Greece. To be more specific, everything started in the Ionian area, at the beginning of the 6th century BC, and lasted until the fall of the Roman Empire, event that occurred in the 5th century AD. In this way, in its development were involved a large number of philosophers, among which include the work done by Plato. To facilitate the understanding of this topic, it is essential to divide the beginnings of philosophy in the West in 3 stages. In the first place is the pre-Socratic philosophy. As its name indicates, it includes everything that was raised before the appearance of Socrates, emphasizing the postulates of Thales of Miletus and the creation of the Ionian school. Then there is the Attic philosophy, a stage that encompasses what was exposed by Plato, who was commissioned to found the academy. This philosophical school had the objective of investigating and deepening in the different fields of knowledge, continuing the teachings of Socrates. Among the most famous students of this institution it is necessary to mention Aristotle, after whose death the Hellenistic period begins, which is considered the final stage. Since Socrates did not leave written works, the work done by his most important disciple, Plato, has become the best reference to understand and study the beginnings of Western philosophy in ancient Greece. Also, in its pages you can find several principles of other fields, such as psychology, metaphysics, and cosmology. All this in terms of cognitive transcendence, which sought to put aside the mysticism that was installed in the Greek world. Through a systematic and ontological approach, Plato tried to explain the meaning of the human being, studying its existence from different areas. In this way, he sowed the seeds of philosophy, but also of politics and epistemology. A recurrent theme in his works is the social aspect. His idea of the ideal state was based on the need for ethics for a harmonious coexistence among people of all kinds, extolling justice at every moment. Finally, it only remains to say that to analyze the beginnings of philosophy in the West, it is essential to study the works of Plato. In addition, the new generations will find valuable lessons that continue to be valid today. The identification of happiness, for example, arises as a constant search that exists between the world of the authentic being and that which is based on personal perception. CC 73. The culture of corruption and its consequences. The concept of corruption is not exclusive of any country or society. It is a problem that is part of the culture, infecting different segments of the population, professions, political parties, and state organizations. In the same way, it is not restricted to a single type of practice, involving a set of mechanisms and processes that are made up of very varied elements. All this makes it necessary to study it as a complex phenomenon, instead of defining it using analytical reductionism. Corruption is present in regimes where authoritarianism predominates, but also in democratic systems. However, it is not limited to the public sector, and ends up affecting all those rules, institutions, and customs, which in theory should regulate the economy, social relations, and even daily life. Likewise, it is capable of interfering with the economic stability of any nation, distorting the fundamental processes in decision-making and affecting the programs implemented for development. This results in an increase in investment, which is never proportional to production and infrastructure, given that there is a deviation of resources based on private benefits. On the other hand, corruption has a negative effect on the perception of basic values, which are the pillars of each society. In this way, the liberties and faculties of all people are undermined, especially those that make up the sectors with fewer resources and that have no possibility of compensating for these abuses. Only by understanding the variables exposed above can you have a better understanding of how corruption works, allowing you to find ways to combat it in an effective way. The most important thing is to analyze its origins, from a sociological and ethical perspective, not only making complaints or disqualifying a certain official, but seeking to involve more solid values in educational centers and through the mass media. However, the problem with these measures is that they are usually regulated by an organism that is part of the state, creating a symbiosis vulnerable to the very corruption that is sought to be fought. This institutional atomization ends up generating more obstacles in its prevention and eradication, benefiting the rulers who have a new way of dividing the previously contained incentives. Corruption is at the same time the cause and effect of a government structure that is operating incorrectly. When it infects the culture of a society, people take it as something natural, and do not perceive its consequences in the medium and long term. An alternative to prevent and correct it is represented by the creation of independent agencies that have the capacity to design clear strategies that take into account all their variables in a systematic way.